And we're seeing an increase now in Pakistani military expenditures, something around 17% at the current rate, up to about $5 billion, and $5.1 billion. And this continues a trend that we've seen in Pakistan since day one, driven by, beginning with the rivalry with India, but of course now legitimate security problems, not just in Fatah, which is where the focus has been, but increasingly now in southern Punjab. And yet, according to the IMF, we're talking about the world's 132nd poorest country. The UNDP, Human Development Index, ranks Pakistan 141 out of 182, below Rwanda, with 46% adult illiteracy. Let's look at military spending in Pakistan compared to social spending in Pakistan. As I said, according to the figures that I have been able to ascertain, you're talking about a country that ranks somewhere around 11th in military spending in the world. Pakistan ranks 108th out of 133 countries for spending on healthcare. On education, according to the UNDP, Pakistan ranks 127th out of 132 countries in terms of GDP, which amounts to only 1.8% of GDP, whereas military spending amounts to more than 3% of GDP. That rank, that only 7.8% of Pakistani government spending is spent on education. That's 93 out of 96 countries. Let me give you another example. Pakistan, we continually hear complaints about how we, the United States, are not doing enough for Pakistan. During the Bush administration, this is a program that slipped completely under the radar. There was a program called the Shared Goals Program. And under this program, the Bush administration gave Pakistan $200 million a year that was supposed to go into the Pakistani public education system. That's $1 billion over 5 years. Where did the money go? There's no trace of that money. Because I can tell you, it doesn't look to me, and I'm a journalist, I'm not an academic, but it sure doesn't look to me like it went where it was supposed to go. Which brings me back to my next point. The fact is that this inordinate military spending is not something that just occurred simply as a result of 2001 and the Bush administration's pressure on Pakistan to send the army, to boost military spending, to send the army into Fatah. This is something that goes back to the creation of Pakistan. Now certainly there was, and the idea that you need this army to defend Pakistan against India. Now certainly for the first 20 years, perhaps 30 years of the Indo-Pakistani relationship, yes, there was this threat from India. But let me posit this idea, that the idea that India wants to surround Pakistan, and this is something we hear continually coming out of your former military commanders, and is the justification for Pakistani national security strategy. The idea that India wants to surround, with the United States, with the Europeans, with Israel, with anyone else you want to throw into that pot, wants to surround Pakistan and destabilize it, is nonsense. I ask you, is it logical to believe that India wants a failed state on its western border, awash in not just conventional weapons in the hands of what will inevitably be a series of Islamic fundamentalist-run sheikdoms, fiefdoms, whatever you want to call it, but people with their hands on not just potentially nuclear weapons, but certainly access to the vast amounts of nuclear materials that exist in Pakistan that can be turned into dirty bombs. I ask you, does it make sense that India wants that on its western border? I submit to you that that's nonsense. Does India want to contain Pakistan military adventurism in places like Afghanistan? Yes. Does India want to contain Pakistani military adventurism through the use of proxy guerrillas in Kashmir as well? Absolutely. But the idea that India wants to attack and destroy Pakistan just doesn't wash. And yet this is the rationale that the Pakistani military uses to sustain the kind of budgets that it's got right now, and to keep the vast bulk of its troops on the eastern border with India. The only way that I believe you can really turn this entire dynamic around and hope for sustained democracy in Pakistan is to change the entire orientation of the way you think of yourselves, or the country thinks of itself, in relationship to its neighbors. And stop with the idea that Pakistan is under threat from these neighbors, that therefore Pakistan needs to rely on this strategy, this strategy of fomenting internal violence and chaos in its neighboring states, so that through the use of guerrilla proxies, which is what has been Pakistan policy, not just since the jihad against the Soviets, but going all the way back to the war in East Pakistan, and the creation of Islamic proxies to battle the Bengalis in East Pakistan. This is something, and this is what the American military call asymmetric warfare. The entire future of Pakistan rests on changing that orientation, because that orientation is what has created the internal security problem in Pakistan, which now is migrated to southern Punjab, and is contributing to the internal stresses that are pulling Pakistan apart. That the only way to stop that process, if it can be stopped at this late date, is to change Pakistan's fundamental orientation towards its neighbors. Unless that takes place, unless you start putting real money into education, into health, into infrastructure, Pakistan has, I believe, the world's largest man-made agricultural irrigation system in the world, and yet it loses 70% of the water through leaks because it hasn't been repaired in so long. Unless that reorientation of Pakistan's priorities and its views of its place in that part of the world changes, I don't know how you reverse the disaster that that region is marching towards, with some of the blame resting on the United States, but a majority of the blame resting on internal Pakistani relations. Then I gravely fear for exactly the same kind of scenario that Marvin was talking about. And there's no strategy that the United States or NATO or Pakistan or anyone in that region has tried to formulate that I know of that anticipates trying to deal with this disaster that I see potentially arising out of an American failure in Afghanistan. And I will leave it there.